So, welcome to our Thursday Substack Live. We're starting to do these weekly. Thank you so much for your support. It's been a great week at the Freak Show. We did a podcast with Sydney Blumenthal last week that about the Russell Vought Substack, and it went viral. So there have been a lot more followers, and I thank you all, new subscribers and old. Today I am joined by author and journalist Clara Bingham. Clara has written a book, which I have here, called The Movement: How Women's Liberation Transformed America in 1963 to 1973. And we are talking with her today because those of you who subscribe and probably saw the essay that I wrote, published yesterday, is a response to the Helen Andrews, conservative writer, article of last week, which got a lot of attention, a lot of response. And this conservative writer, claims that that basically everything that's wrong with America was caused by feminists, and she calls it the feminization of America. She blames women specifically for cancel culture, and that's been discussed. I discussed it in my essay, and when I read it, I thought right away of Clara, because Clara has written the first book, the first oral history of the decade that built the modern feminist movement in the United States, from Betty Friedan to the Underground Abortion Railroad, the Janes, to Shirley Chisholm, first Black female presidential candidate, to Billie Jean King's historic win over Bobby Riggs in the Battle of the Sexes. And I met Clara giving a short reading of her book, too short, actually, I thought, at the
too short.
Yes, you should have talked longer, at the KGB nonfiction series in Manhattan, which I recommend to all of our listeners. It is a small venue, but they do it a second Tuesday of every month, and we had a lot of fun. And Clara talked about the book and talked about these women that she met, and I just think it's incredibly important to remember them and to not just honor, but be aware of where they came from and what they did. So that's why we have Clara on today. And Clara, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Nina.
Start with, why did you decide to write this book?
I've always been a rabid feminist, but I was born in 1963. So I'm essentially, this was the wallpaper going on behind my childhood. And I grew up in New York City on the Upper West Side. And of course, I therefore was the first generation of beneficiaries of these incredible trailblazers. And I realized, now so many years later, that women's liberation, women's lib, feminism in general had become kind of a dirty word.
Mm-hmm.
And so many young women who were, full on beneficiaries of the incredible barriers these women broke down for us didn't know anything about them or really respect them. They just thought they were a bunch of white middle class complainer bra burners. So I just thought that before these women died, I really should get to them. And I interviewed over 100, living second wave feminists whose ages range from 75 to 95. And I got them to explain to me what their life was like before, how they were then compelled to change their lives, and what it looked like after. And each one of them had a completely different experiences. And it helped me when I wrote this book, to understand how global this movement was. And I learned so much that I didn't know. And little did I know that Dobbs, of course, would be, decided. I was halfway through writing the book. I'd interviewed most everyone before Roe was reversed in June of 2022. But suddenly this went really from just a piece of history to a blueprint for change. And I feel like we are now, under the Trump administration, experiencing a onslaught of anti-feminist, anti-women um, decisions and proclamations, and federal cuts, and not to mention the sort of new dialectic of women like Helen Andrews and a lot of conservative women who are out there denouncing feminism while practicing it at the same time. So I just think that this book is sort of living on beyond what I originally meant to write it for, which is to kind of make sure that we understood what this history really was and how much we owe this generation of women who are now looking at what's going on now and wondering what's happening. And the fact is, history always repeats itself because we have amnesia and everyone forgets and no one reads books anymore. And so it's just, I find it almost comical to see what's happening now in terms of the dialogue about women, and what women should be and should do.
You mentioned that you interviewed 100 of them. The book is called The Movement, by the way. I see people asking the question who just signed on. You mentioned that that's a lot of people, and that you said that they all had different experiences. I find that's sort of an intriguing thing to say, because in a way, when I think about them, I think this is sort of monolithic response to forced, the birth, no birth control, and then abortion being illegal, back alley abortions. And then things like women not being allowed to have their own bank accounts and some of the other things that you mentioned. Can you just go through a couple of the sort of leading, I guess, issues that brought these disparate people together?
I mean, just for example, in 1963, abortion was illegal nationally, and at least 1,000 women a year were dying from back alley abortions. And there were city hospitals that had abortion wards, botched abortion wards, where women would go with sepsis and get treated, and
they were dying or left,
and they were dying,
or left infertile. A
lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a healthcare crisis. Meanwhile, birth control was regulated state by state, and it wasn't until 1973 that women who were not married, 1972, the women who were single could get birth control nationwide. And so birth control was hard to get.
That was the same year that abortion became legal. Am I right?
Yeah, it was the year before.
And
72. Yeah. So the Supreme Court decision that allowed birth control to be nationally available, prescription birth control, for single women, didn't become law until 1972, the year before Roe. And so really women had very little agency over their bodies. And that's just the beginning. That was the most sort of life or death issue, which was incredibly pressing and important. But also, they couldn't run in marathons. Women didn't play sports professionally or in college or high school, barely at all. There was no funding for sports. Sports was considered unladylike. The marathon didn't allow women to run in it until 1973. I interviewed the first woman who ran it illegally in 1966. Billie Jean King
Wasn't she dragged off by the cops?
That was actually the next year. Catherine Switzer, who ran it legally, she had an actual bib, and they thought she was a woman because she just put K, and then her last name, and she was dragged off, but fought them off and was able to finish and get timed. But before her, the year before, Bobby Gibbs just jumped out of the bushes in her hoodie sweatshirt and ran it. And it was a total phenomenon because
Amazing.
women were told by doctors that their uterus would fall out if they ran long distances, that they only played half court basketball because sweating was bad for them. So that just gives you a little sense of how women were considered physically feeble. They were also considered intellectually inferior. And the only jobs really that were available for women were secretary, teacher, nurse, flight attendant, and a domestic. And if you were a flight attendant, for example, you were fired at age 32, or if you were above their very low weight limit, instantly. So, or if you got engaged, you were fired. So there were so few opportunities available. 6% of doctors were women. In 1963, 3% of lawyers were women. There were very few, if any, tenured professors in colleges who were women. So women were shut out of art galleries. Being a professional artist was a very difficult thing to do for women. So it was just such a massive and fundamental shift for women to finally break down all of these professional and social barriers to get, for really the first time in human history, considered to be first-class citizens in society. I mean, these women, in just that 10 years that my book covers, changed the fate of all women who came after them, because suddenly doors opened that had been shut for thousands of years. So it was a really seismic change. And right now, and there's no way that we can be put back in that box. There were no credit cards, there was no mortgages, there was no financial agency.
Yeah, women, I mean, reading your book, you understand this is something people do not understand. I mean, people are aware, I think, of the back alley abortion issues and the birth control issues, but women were literally under male guardianship financially.
Exactly.
Like we weren't Saudi Arabia, but we were, and this is within living memory. This is what you have experienced by talking to these women who are alive, that this was the way it was for women within living memory. And it is unimaginable to you and me, the generation that first benefited, and to everyone coming after us. I definitely think, don't you think that? It is unimaginable even to somebody like a Helen Andrews or the pronatalists who are like, going off into their trad wife, cocoons. I don't even think they can conceive of what that was like to live that way.
Right.
And
Although
certainly
in this perverse way, they idolize it and they hold
so
it up.
talk about that. Talk about, because to me, what this is, I wrote a book about the vaccine, the COVID vaccine. It was a very short book, but I did a lot of research into vaccine resistance and vaccine paranoia and conspiracy theories. And what I came to understand very simply is that this generation that we live in, and a little bit before us, we're so spoiled that we have no conception of what it was like before there were vaccines. We don't know what it was like, that all of our grandparents would have either seen a sibling get terribly ill or die. Their parents would have seen their children die of diseases that we can't even pronounce. And now you've got half the country and our HHS secretary dispensing with these protective advances.
And
so
it's so similar.
Kind of thing. It's like
so
a spoiled,
similar.
yes, it's a spoiled generation kind of thing. But anyway, back to let's talk a little bit about what these women were up against, because they were, I mean, I watched Dick Cavett talking to Susan Brown Miller, little clip that I recommend everybody to Google this. You've probably seen it. And Hugh Hefner is in the room, is on the couch. And the way even Dick Cavett, who is kind of a progressive leaning journalist, even the way that he was talking to her with such superciliousness, such scorn and ridicule. And you could see her, she was young, she was in her early 30s. You could see her resisting the urge to lose her temper or whatever, but she calmly responded. But the fact is, when I watched it, I thought, even on Fox News Today or any of the right-wing podcasts where they have women, which they're allowed to talk to, like the Benny Johnsons and so on, those guys would never talk to women in public the way that they talked to these women in the 1970s and treated them. Or if you watch any video of the 1972 Democratic National Convention, where Shirley Chisholm, was the way that the news media talked about them, so scornful, so ridiculing. So talk to us a little bit about what they were up against and how they resisted.
Yeah, I mean, I think that example of Susan Brown Miller on Dick Cavett happened hundreds of times. Every time Betty Friedan, Susan Brown Miller, Gloria Steinem, all of them, Robin Morgan would go on a television or a radio show. They would face that sort of just incredible ridicule. That it was a joke, and the movement was considered by mainstream media a complete joke. And I mean, for example, when Ms. Magazine came out for the first time in 1972, it was panned by all of the white male columnists because, of course, all of mainstream media was white male. So they were up against, just to be treated with any respect was almost impossible because these women were up against in a fortress of white male patriarchy. The entire political world was white male. In the 72 convention, women couldn't get, abortion on the Democratic platform. And they fought and fought and fought. And McGovern sort of toyed with them and thought it was cute and needed their votes and in the end betrayed them. That was the first convention, for example, where women demanded that 50% of the delegates be women. And before that, I mean, hardly any delegates were women. So all power was white male at that time. And so women were considered, emotionally fragile, physically fragile, and intellectually inferior. And their role, which is what's been coming up now, what is our role? Is their role was prescribed in the box as being mothers and wives first. And if they had to have a job on the side because their husbands couldn't, afford to keep them, then fine, that was a dalliance. That was, something just to make pin money. There was no such thing as women having careers. And the fact is, men were incredibly threatened by it because it changed the world order. It changed the entire world order. And so
now let's just
this was a consciousness thing.
The world order, they changed the world order against a lot of odds. They exposed male and female. There were laws besides just the ridicule and scorn. There were laws that held women back. There were specific characters on women, thinking of Phyllis Schlafly, who were leading this sort of the resistance to this movement. And talk to me a little bit about Phyllis before we move on to the next, because I think we're dealing with some like newborn Phyllis's.
Yeah, well, I feel like the trad wife movement is very much has earned a lot of the same. It comes from the exact same fountain of bizarre, limiting ideas of what women should be. They're very, very similar, Schlafly and the Trad Wives. And so I wanted to read, I had forgotten this wonderful letter that Schlafly, well, first of all, she was a conservative political activist. She had 6 children. She lived in
Illinois, my home state.
In Illinois. And she actually ran for Congress and lost. She was very politically ambitious. And when the ERA passed Congress and the Senate with flying colors, massive majorities, and was about to go out to be,
Ratified.
ratified by 2/3 of the state legislatures, she realized this is actually a really good political topic for her. And she was a political opportunist. But she started a newsletter, and she allied with Sam Ervin, who was a senator who was ancient and hated the ERA and hated feminism. And she wrote him this letter, which I thought was really, just the first few paragraphs is so familiar. She wrote, "Women's lib is a total assault on the role of the American woman as wife and mother, and on the family as the basic unit of society. Women's libbers are trying to make wives and mothers unhappy with their career, make them feel that they are second-class citizens and abject slaves. They are promoting abortions instead of families. Why should we trade in our special privileges and honored status for the alleged advantage of working in office or assembly line?" So this special status is also an important part of this current, anti-feminism backlash, is that women are special because we're mothers, and that we should be protected. And that a lot of the laws that you talked about that women had to break down in the 60s and 70s were protective laws. I mean, for example, in Michigan and California, women couldn't be bartenders unless their husbands or their fathers owned the bar. And that was supposedly to protect them from, lewd behavior by men. But it was really set up by the union of bartenders who didn't want women taking their jobs away. And it was completely legal to discriminate against women in the workplace until the Civil Rights Act passed Title VII in 1964. And that was a fluke where it was meant to be really racial equality.
Yeah.
Title VII was the employment part of the Civil Rights Act. And in the last minute, sex was thrown in, and the idea was really to try to derail the amendment. But it passed, and all of a sudden, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, had to field complaints both from Black Americans who were being horribly discriminated against in the workplace and women. And a third of the complaints that came in were women. So the idea that there was no equality, it wasn't accepted as an idea.
Right.
Until
And
later in the
let's just reiterate the point that the Civil Rights Act passed for Blacks, but they threw in the women part because they thought that would kill it.
Right.
Not because they were hoping that women would have the right to fight against workplace discrimination. And as I mentioned to you yesterday when we were talking about this, there's this conservative writer, Chris Caldwell, who's written an entire book about the Civil Rights Act called The Age of Entitlement. I'm not giving it an ad here, but it's an interesting way to look at how the MAGAs are looking at the world right now, because their attitude is that from 1964 on, these rights were given and they've been expanded to include, first Blacks, then women, now gays, now trans, disabled. And Caldwell literally says that everyone has a special right except for the white male. So that's where we're at with the mentality here, right? That their aggrievement is so great. And to me, I mean, when you read the Helen Andrews piece, aside from the fact that this is a woman writing it, which we can get to, it's this idea that women, that the modicum of gains that have been made here has so upset the apple cart, right? That they have that we have this gigantic backlash, and it's a bigger backlash than even when Susan Faludi wrote her backlash book in 1989.
In the 80s, yeah.
It's gone on to another level. You mentioned yesterday that you thought that jump came because of the Me Too. Are you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the jump is partly because
we're talking about the backlash explosion.
Yeah,
testosterone.
the backlash, this explosion, this reaction, I think, is partly due to the Me Too movement that started in 2017. And then picked up steam in 2020 with Black Lives Matters and a new emphasis on DEI. which helped both women and people of color, and in the workplace and other places. And what happened is it both of these things basically just protected the rights of women, especially Me Too, in the workplace. And what I was so shocked by during Me Too was I thought we had sort of managed sexual harassment. Because I wrote a book called Class Action that was about the reaction to Anita Hill in 91 and the beginning of class action sexual harassment lawsuits. And that was when sexual harassment was becoming illegal, was being enforced in the workplace. And women, because they were finally being protected in the workplace, were able to get into the workforce in larger numbers. And now we have women in larger numbers in the workforce. And I think because of that, I mean, Helen Andrews' whole point was that there's been the feminization of corporate America, of the government, and that
Or the
this is a
HR
bad
lady that
thing.
you can tattle to,
Right,
that who can control the enterprising, brave, creative, risk-taking, and sexually harassing man.
right. And so suddenly woke, is a bad thing, and it's all women's fault, essentially, because they don't want to be sexually harassed in the office, and they don't want to have to deal with that. And so I just think that women have always been threatening with female power from the dawn of, the ages has always been extremely threatening to men. It is like part of the human condition. And
The
and
oldest,
whenever women get
the oldest war in history.
yeah,
Right.
no, exactly. And we are women are the sort of most oppressed people throughout history. And that's just it's just rearing that misogyny that has been kind of, and especially during Me Too, had to really go into the closet, is just coming right back out. And part of it is that it did go too far. The pendulum always does this. And too many men were canceled without getting any sort of a trial, and lives were ruined, unfairly and too quickly. And the guillotine was out, and many heads were cut off, and it went too far. And that always happens with movements for social change. So then, therefore, we're witnessing this backlash that is really. It's also so ironic because there are so many conservative women who are actually in power right now.
Yeah, talk to me about that, because you sound pretty sanguine about the future. I mean, you do seem to think that this is not a permanent alteration, although I think the stuff that's going on with the forced birth states is actually quite scary, and quite going to be quite difficult to reverse, and the way things are. But you seem to be pretty
That's for
sanguine,
sure.
and I think there is, of course, there's reason to hope. And let's talk about these working right-wing women, like the ones that Pamela Paul featured in the Wall Street
Right,
Journal article.
exactly. And so that amazing Wall Street Journal story, which I thought was so smart of her to go and find the really powerful Republican women who are out there spouting a lot of Christian nationalist, propaganda essentially, but not living it. And
They're
what
not
they're
living the trad wife dream. They're dressing up in pantsuits. I mean, if you look at Pam Bondi and you look at Kristi Noem, they're in the Hillary Clinton uniform.
right, right,
And the
exactly.
Nancy Pelosi uniform, that's what you
Right,
wear in Washington. And they are not at home with their babies. And that Pamela Paul article, you can tell, and you can see it from just looking at Kristi Noem and Bondi. They're on jets all the time, traveling hither and yon. They're in the office, and their babies are home with daddies or nannies.
right. Just
Am I
like Phyllis
right?
Schlafly with her 6 children who she rarely saw.
Right. So
Um,
this dream, so they want the dream life, or the myth of the dream life, for somebody. Now, who would that be? Who would really want that dream life? Well, of course, they're their auxiliary to this movement of Paul Ingracias and Andrew Tates and so on, who they don't even complain about
no, exactly.
publicly. I mean,
And
privately, they probably wouldn't want to be in the same room with Andrew Tate.
probably. And I think what it is they, like Phyllis Schlafly, are political opportunists. And they don't like, they know that this is what's in power right now. And they're riding that wave because they want to be in the room and they want influence and power. And they may be, very Christian, and that gives them, one sort of foothold in this world. And they're probably, I'm not sure where they are. Most of them, I'm sure, or at least officially, are anti-choice, or anti-abortion. But what they have is exactly what the feminists of the 60s and 70s wanted for women, which is to have a choice. They didn't want women not to have children and not to have families. And they didn't think that being a housewife was a horrible thing to be. They just wanted women to have a choice. So, for example, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who's the governor of Arkansas, has three three children, and she loves having that choice. She loves having it all, just like Caroline Levitt and Amy Coney Barrett, for example.
Amy Coney Barrett has seven kids?
I think it's something like 7.
Seven.
Some of them
And
are
she's
adopted.
at work all day. Who's watching those babies? Is it
So,
the husband? That's they're not living the life. They're walking the walk of empowered women. And it's just so ironic that the all the hard work that these women did, the scorn they faced, and to live their lives, and at the end of their lives to watch this Dobbs ruling, shove women back decades in terms of bodily control, and have women empowered by them actually acting in on behalf of the Andrew Tates and the Trumps and so on. Before we wrap up, I want you to talk a little bit about why this regressive movement seems to be appealing to younger women. You have this EV magazine, which is pushing this kind of notion that hormonal birth control is bad for you. All of sort of the woo woo quackery medicine that's coming up with Bobby, and now I think Casey Means, where you just have you're giving people the sort of the DIY medical notions back. Like, well, maybe if you just take do the 28-day cycle thing with Peter Thiel's menstrual tracker, you might be able to avoid getting pregnant if you're not ready. Is this something that you see being attractive to younger women? You and I both have daughters, by the way. We were both at our daughter's graduation from the same school, which we didn't know until we met each other. They both graduated from college. Neither one of them is into tradwifery, I don't think.
No.
But what do you? I mean, do you think this is being hyped up, or do you think there is a genuine, like, the backlash sort of filtering down to this generation?
I mean, I think a lot of the tradwife influencer world is a function of social media, and it's a fantasy. I think it's a fantasy for a lot of hardworking young women who are stressed out by their lives and are trying to do it all because they have to, and that the trad wives, the beautiful ballerina farm, women.
Mesmerizing.
Yeah, I mean, gorgeous, and
Yeah.
and her husband's even hotter, and he's rich, and everything's perfect. Like, everyone, it's this sort of Cinderella. Everyone's got this Cinderella complex, and it's just it's just a out. It's just an escape, I think. And what I object to about them is they're also making a business. They're influencers now. They're making money off of this sort of ideal that no one can really live in. What if your husband dies? What if he cheats on you and leaves you? What if he loses his job and can't support you? I mean, that's what the feminists wanted. That's why the feminists wanted women to be empowered so they could protect themselves and be financially independent in case their husbands, couldn't do it all for them. And so it's a fantasy life that these women are selling, and they're selling it, and they're making a lot of money because there were influencers who were selling their, special flour and wooden spoons and baby food. So I just think that they appeal, but it's a niche thing too. Let's not forget. I mean, even if you have a lot of followers, it doesn't mean anything in the real world to real people. I just think that we take social media too seriously in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And so that they're trending and they've got a lot of followers and they've got, that magazine. But I don't think it really necessarily means it's a real movement. I just think there is something attractive about it. And the whole Maha, connection and to the trad wives and, questioning birth control. My daughter doesn't do well on the pill, and some women really don't. And so that hormone tracker is,
Yeah. Well, let's also, the complaints again, the Helen Andrews complaint about too many women in colleges, universities, in medicine now, in the law, turning these professions into, HR lady, nightmare, nightmares where, things aren't getting done. The fact is, that certainly in medicine, there's so little research money going into woman-only problems. I mean,
Yeah.
I heard somebody. I was at a conference last week where the woman, it was a doctor, I think formerly in the U.S. In the FDA or something, and she said, I think something like less than 2% of VC money in the healthcare space goes to woman-only healthcare research, medical research, and
I've heard that NIH
and
is
so
only
with women.
4%.
Yeah, so young women and having these, very female specific problems. Of course, the pill can be, hormonal birth control can be improved, and so can things like endometriosis that haven't been studied. These women have all these problems that they go then to acupuncture or go to the tea. I still remember,
Right.
we would just sit around talking about, well, what are because these alternative methods are in filling the gap where the actual science is not being done because they have only just started to study women's health. It's been ignored until very recently. And similarly, other policies that women that are not, family friendly, there's Congress is on family unfriendly.
Oh, completely. We
Dramatically.
don't have
You cannot have
childcare.
you don't have childcare. You don't have, nobody. I mean, you have small children. You just band-aid together your whole life. And so, of course, these younger women are looking at the mothers harried, trying to do and trying to hold it all together. And it doesn't look like a lot of fun. But
No.
you know what? It's a lot more fun than the alternative, which is being under male financial guardianship and having nothing at the end.
Well, what's so frustrating is that the pronatalist movement is not doing anything of substance to help women want to have more children, to be able to have more children, because there's one thing they need: childcare. They need childcare. And, the feminists had a great universal childcare bill that it came past the House and the Senate, and it was on Nixon's desk, and he vetoed it because the idea of universal childcare seemed sort of communist. It was like the state is going to raise your children, and that then put mothers out of a job, and took them out of their role of being mothers. And so this idea that Republicans, they've never supported childcare in a real way. And the childcare tax credit, which is about to go. I mean, they've been pretty good on tax credits, but small, not very much.
Yeah.
So the fact is, we need paid medical leave, which we don't have, and we need universal childcare, which we don't have. And if we had those two things, then it would be different. And so that the anti-abortion movement that is basically putting 48% of the women in childbearing ages in America in basically practically a slave state where they have no control over their bodies, and now can't even have miscarriages safely in 18 states.
Mm-hmm.
Those states aren't providing, which are forcing women to have children, are not providing more childcare, more help, more prenatal help alone. There's no very little prenatal care, care for women. So there's just no care for women. But we're supposed to be doing everything. And the hypocrisy of it is so maddening.
Well, okay. On that note, I think that we all know that hypocrisy is maddening. They all should be wearing the red ache and walking around laughed at and pointed at and not reelected. I want to just reiterate, I'll give you the last word on this. Can they really put us back in the box electorally and bodily for a long period of time?
I really don't think they can, because the difference now is women actually have power. Now women on both sides have power, and there are more Democratic women politicians out there, and there are, women running companies, and it's just we will not be giving up our influence that we have now that we never ever had before. And so in terms of abortion and birth control, that is really, I think, the big human rights issue that we're dealing with, and that's going to be hard, but possible. Luckily, because we have mifepristone, we haven't had thousands of women dying, or we certainly have had
Yeah,
maybe a dozen. But
yeah.
we have advances in technology and advances in power, both financial and political, that I think it just can't be taken away.
Well, I hope that you're right. And Clara, we thank you so much for coming on, and thank you to the listeners and subscribers to the Freak Show. I believe Clara also has a Substack, but I want you all to go out and check her book out at the bookstores, and teach your daughters well, and your sons, because this is a piece of history that's, I think, world class important, not just to American women. So we need to remember them. So
Thank you,
thank you very
Nina.
much. Thank
Thank
you.
you for
Take
having
care.
me.
Good night. Goodbye. See you next
Bye.
week. Bye.